What does your stuff say about you and your story? Find out on today's episode of Communicate for Impact Live.
Welcome to Communicate for Impact Live, sharing stories, deeper connections. I'm Douglas and Lisa Marie Hassan, and we are founders of Communicate for Impact. We teach 3 storytelling frameworks called story hacks that help you create better content faster. And today we are delighted to welcome our guest, Mark Ainley. Mark is a contemporary Feng Shui facilitator and instructor. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Woohoo! Mark, it is awesome to have you. We've been looking forward to this all week. Big shout out, first and foremost, to our mutual friend Sophie Lechner for introducing us. Sophie, I think, is watching today. Hey, Sophie.
Hey, Sophie.
All right, let's dive in. Feng Shui.
Mhm.
Number one, Mark. Am I saying it correctly?
You actually are. It's great. It's not. I like to say it sounds like fun way. So you could consider it's a fun way of using design. But yeah, so you are
Excellent.
pronouncing it correctly.
Excellent. I feel better about myself already.
Perfect.
Okay, number two. What is Feng Shui and why should we care about it?
So Feng Shui originally derived out of China, but it's a universal way of looking at how the environment impacts us. And, our bodies, we all come from nature, but we're living in human designed constructs.
Mm.
And those designs, by definition, by how they're built, they tend to be lacking in some of what it is that we need. So super convenient to, it's raining today in Vancouver, finally. We've been waiting for it. And it's nice to be dry. And it's nice to be warm and all of those things. But there are certain things in man-made design that kind of work against us as well. And so Feng Shui is really about how can we balance, the convenience and the stability and the protection that we have in a human designed environment with some of those other ingredients that we need in order to feel more at ease, more our best, to really feel in alignment with who we are.
You said something in our pre-interview about work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Well,
just mentioned balance. So we'll talk about that for just a sec.
yeah, for sure. Well, actually, I mean, that's, it's a popular expression, and it's one that I actually think we need to revisit because I think it's just
Mhm.
life balance. As soon as you say work-life balance, you're saying that work is not part of your life,
Mm,
or somehow antithetical to yourself. So there's work and then there's life. And so how do you bring your work to life? How is your work part of an extension of who you are and how you express in the world? And that's kind of what Feng Shui is really about is, your home environment and your workspace should be an expression of who you are. It should be beyond functional. And it needs to be functional, but it also, I think it's that non-duality. It's not work against life and it's not function against design and balance. So really balance is one of the names of the game. So
So
go ahead.
so stop compartmentalizing and just
Yeah.
say life balance. I think that's great.
I think it's just life balance. How do you balance your life? How do you balance your work? How do you balance your relationships? How do you balance your leisure? I mean, life is not just one thing. There's all these different components and work is part of it. And so I think that it betrays how our language does betray sometimes some thoughts that we don't recognize are counterproductive. And while some of it might be accurate, there's sometimes something else in there that's just, a little bit toxic or not as constructive, or it's not quite what we really think is going on.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, Mark, you have a new course out, and it's called The Story of Your Stuff. By the way, that is the perfect HGTV show. So, if anyone's listening from HGTV, come on, Story of Your Stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, what is the connection between Feng Shui and storytelling, or your stuff and stories?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we are, our environment impacts us so much. And everything we look at is sending us messages. And the easiest way to talk about this, and this is how I usually talk to business people and the skeptical husbands when I'm doing the consultation, when it's usually the wife who brings me in, is if you think about advertising, how much was Super Bowl advertising? I remember, did you hear what the costs were, right? I think this year was 6.3 to $7 million for 30 seconds. And that's basically to get into your brain through your eyes and to present some images, sounds, thoughts, all of these things in a little package that's going to change your behavior. And so if the stuff that you're looking at for seconds is worth that much money for profit-driven companies, what's the impact of the stuff that you're looking at for weeks, months, and years? Right? It's not just because it's on a screen or on a billboard or in a magazine that you are imprinted by what it is that you're looking at. So the stuff in your home, and especially because it's personal, you chose it. It's not just something you're accidentally seeing. You chose it. You have a history with it, whether you chose it unconsciously or not, or you inherited and you didn't think about it. That actually doesn't matter. You're still receptive. Your brain still interprets on both a universal and a personal level. So your stuff is going to be telling you something. So if you're keeping Aunt Gladys's tea set there because, out of guilt and because, if she comes over and she doesn't see it, you're sending yourself a message that other people's needs can sometimes override your own. Every time you see it, there is that message. So it's like water that drips on a stone and it carves away at something. So we want to tell ourselves the stories of who we really are. And it's often much bigger than how we perceive ourselves. And so what Feng Shui can do is we use some universal themes and we take a look at really the subliminal messaging and we upgrade the story from what's pre-existing, but it's, both individual and universal. And we design a space, in a sense, we reverse engineer it to match your future self. And
you and I had a conversation, Mark, earlier, and I said, what about my grandmother's china that I have such fond memories of because I remember sitting at the table with her, but I don't have room for it. So it's sitting in boxes in the basement storage, but I can't part with it.
Yeah.
I know there are people out there that have similar situations. How do you
Absolutely.
address
Yeah, and it's tough, right? Because there's not just one way, and this is the thing. People can get very rigid with and very strict about all of these things, and I think it's really important to have the human element because this is human-centered design, and it's supposed to serve you. If you have those fond memories, then you want to be using them. You want to be actually using that item. And otherwise, if you have the fond memories, you don't need the item because you have the memories. So if it's sitting in a box, you're not serving your grandmother, you're not activating, in a sense, that item. Ideally, you would have space for it and use it. So I'm not against, the Aunt Gladys tea set situation is the fact if you don't like Aunt Gladys and you don't like the tea set, right, then that's another story. In your case, if it brings back fond memories, I'm not against things from the past, but you want to have something that's current also. But you want to use things. And one of the big things, I say for clutter, there's 3 categories for them. It's not being used, it's not in the right place, or you don't actually have space for it, or a combination of those 3. So, if you don't have that in the right space and you're not using it, then it's kind of turning into clutter. But maybe there's something else you can give up and then you can use it.
It's helpful to have that kind of almost definition of clutter because clutter can be sort of overwhelming. You don't really know how to address it. And you've just given us a nice window into how do you look at it and how do you attack it.
That's one of the things that I focus on in the course. That's actually part of week 1, which we just started this past week, is just looking at those 3. And you just start thinking about, well, is it being used or is it in the right place? And if it's not in the right place, then how do I make space? Sometimes the dish rack is full because you don't actually have space in the cabinet. So then the issue isn't the dishes.
Oh, no.
The dish rack. It's about what's in the cabinet. Sometimes we have to go a few steps away and find out where's the log jam. So, for a space, I like to say in terms of also this helps with the pronunciation that for Feng Shui, functionality is a big part of it. So it's not just about, fancy decor or anything like that. It's really about how functional is the space, and functional aesthetics is part of functionality. Steve Jobs talked about that, that the design is, how it works and how it looks. And, and so, it's important to recognize that everything around you is telling a story, and you might be selling yourself short. So we often don't, because we're not taught how to read the subliminal messaging in the way that Feng Shui consultants are. I could probably make way more money in advertising, but I'd rather do this.
Well,
So someone just said
Go
in the
ahead.
comment, could I bring out two pieces from my grandmother's china and use them? I think the solution is to take one of the plates and hang it on the wall so that I can look at it, remember how beautiful it is, but I don't have to have the whole set taking up space.
Yeah, that's it.
Good.
And another thing that can be done, that used to be common, you keep the baby shoes and you keep this and you keep that. Take photos
Yeah.
of them. If you have photos of them, if you think out of 24/7, 365 days of the year, how many seconds are you going to be actually interfacing with that, and why? And does it need to take up the physical space, or can you just interface with the photo? It's tough, and there's no actual way. I've lost both parents, and I know that the process of letting go of things is not easy. It's not linear. And so it does require some energy, and it helps when you have other people doing it. But so and the fact is, you have those emotional attachments to, grandma's set, and sometimes negative attachments to Aunt Gladys's. But
Poor Aunt Gladys.
Poor Aunt Gladys, I know, right? But but the story is still there, and the story's there with all of your stuff. And so you want to really reevaluate: what am I telling myself? What am I selling myself?
Oh. It's so interesting. When we think about psychology, we typically and rightly think internally. Psychology is something that happens in here. But Feng Shui is really in part, it's the psychology of things, the psychology of the external world around us.
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on to our next question, talk about that for a second.
Well, a lot of people will think that Feng Shui is just hocus pocus, and it's just, sort of new agey, even though, of course, it's thousands of years old, or it's just cultural or superstition or whatever. But, there is a whole field of environmental psychology. There is science-backed data, and it's stuff that I've been looking into, and there's a whole lot of alignment between what environmental psychologists say and what Feng Shui says. And, in the design world now, biophilia is a hot topic, 14 principles of, what we find in nature and how that supports humans in design. Every single one of those 14 principles you see in Feng Shui applications. So just because it wasn't articulated that way or wasn't scientifically proven doesn't mean it's not. And I'm not saying everything in Feng Shui is scientifically validated, but, but there is a psychological element. Absolutely. Yeah. And I've seen it, and it's, I've seen people improve their mindset and their state of being from what I'm doing. I'm not suggesting people do Feng Shui instead of medical or psychological or whatever interventions or anything like that. Really important that, you cover all bases, but your environment has a huge impact on you, and it affects how you sleep is going to affect all your waking hours. How you spend your space, what it is you see affects your mood, your mindset. It's very, very important.
That's very cool. Over the course of the last 20 plus years, Mark, you have worked with a lot of clients, largely individual clients, but you're starting to work more with companies. Talk about branding strategy and storytelling and how Feng Shui fits into the picture. In our pre-interview, you gave us an interesting example involving a famous fashion house.
Yeah.
Just curious to hear, what does Feng Shui mean for a company?
Well, again, the impact of the space is huge. You want the space to be welcoming. You want the space to reflect the company identity. And so, the colors, the design, everything is part of that. But it's also the whole flow through the space. And, on my bio, it says on LinkedIn, flow optimization specialist. And that was a term that actually came up when I was interviewed by Retail Insider, a Canadian company that focuses on high-end luxury real estate and fashion brands. And they did an extensive interview with me about commercial real estate and Feng Shui. And I think, a lot of larger companies, I've worked a lot more in Asia, by the way. I started working with companies in Japan starting in 2005, where they're a lot more receptive because it's part of their culture. So I've been very active teaching in Japan since 2003. And in North America, I think some people are starting to get the idea, thanks to Oprah and other people who use it. But I think people understand the concept of how you want the space to work and flow in a certain way, but they might not get that there's unintended consequences to some of the choices. So this one particular story that I told you about, it was actually Craig from Retail Insider who took me on the main high-end shopping street in Toronto, and he gave me a little quiz, and he's like, okay, can you see who's doing well and who's not just by looking at the entrances? And he knew
Doing well, like financially, like financially,
like whose business is going well
yeah.
and who's not. Craig has the inside scoop on everybody, and I told him what I was seeing and why, and I was 100% accurate on judging about 14 stores from one standing position on the street. And what surprised me was this one very high end, everybody knows it, I'm not naming it, fashion brand whose store, there was no sign at eye level. Everything, there was one that was high, there was nothing at eye level. And the entrance, the ground, there was no welcome mat. The ground had dust and everything all around it, like dirt. It hadn't been swept, it looked like, in several days. And he said, I was just like, it's unimaginable and it's just completely off brand. And he said, yeah, nobody knows, but they're closing in 6 months. So, if you can't be bothered to sweep your entrance, you're not providing, first of all, a first-class experience if you're wanting people to drop what kind of money. And there's all kinds of things. And you're not also going to be taking care of all of the details, like taking care of the books and balancing everything like that's the same thing as like sweeping. How do you keep your house in order?
Right.
It's there's a total relationship between the willingness to take care of those fine details, and that's what high end is. It's all of those fine details. You walk into a high end restaurant, hotel, anything like that, you're not going to see cables anywhere. You shouldn't see stickers inside the lamp. There's all of these things where it's like there's this stuff that does not compute. Everything should be seamless, and there's an element to design. In nature, things are actually pretty seamless. And so there's things we can do that can upgrade and sell things appropriately. Now, on that tour as well, Craig took me just to speak to unintended consequences. We walked into one shop, and I saw, this massive black wall at this staircase. And, black in Feng Shui is water. Water flows down. If you think of a staircase, which is already, water would flow down a staircase already. So if you add black to it, there's going to be even more of that. And we're talking to the guy, and he's like, oh, it's like impossible to get anybody up those stairs. Nobody goes up and checks out our second floor. And I'm like, I think I see kind of the problem that's going on over here. And it was a beautiful store. Aesthetically, it was gorgeous.
So what was a possible solution there?
Repaint. And
so
also,
what kind of color?
Red heat rises. There's that, but it doesn't have to be red, right? It could be neutral. You could still have elements of black in it, but it was just this solid black as this nonstop wall of water that was flowing down. So there's all kinds of possibilities. One thing, if you put red at the top of the stairs, it draws your attention. The eye immediately goes to red, and it sort of gives that lift, and you need to get your heart rate a little bit, or it will be working by the time you get to the top of the steps, right? So you get that little pitter patter going already, and then it can draw you in more. And it's the challenge again with Feng Shui is, there are some quick hint things. I think it's one of the big misunderstandings, but it requires a lot more. Well, what else is going on in the space, and what else is weird, and where is the staircase, and what's the flooring like, all of that. So, but it was just interesting that, a place can look great. It can look absolutely perfect and beautiful, and there can still be something off. And we might, on some level, sense it, but we might not.
So when you were going back to the Toronto fashion retail example, you mentioned the eye level thing. Mm-hmm. Why was that important, where the sign was not at eye level?
You couldn't even see the name of the store. I mean, you're walking, and it's like, you have to look up, and it's like, you have to like tilt your head at 45 degrees to see the name of the store. I mean,
and when you're walking down a city sidewalk, you're not on the other side of the street where you can look up and see signage. You're looking literally peripherally, almost 6 inches away from you potentially.
It sends a signal. It sends a signal that they are above you. That's something you mentioned. Is that right?
You got it. See, this is exactly. That's part of it, right? And it's like it's just and it's a little bit out of your reach. I mean, there's all kinds of subliminal messages that we're not aware of. that these things can do to us. So, that's where it's really important to have that kind of walkthrough, I think, for a company to do really well, and for people to understand that any of these little things could be sending the wrong message, and with repeated viewing and experiencing, it can be consequential.
But it's not just retail space that we're talking about that you want to be welcoming and appealing to the customer, but businesses that really want their employees to be enriched in the environment and productive in the environment, they need to consider some things. So, Mark, if you had a 3-item checklist for someone who wants to walk around their remote office or walk around their home or walk around their office building, if there were just like maybe 3 things they could look for or consider that's working or not working to improve their environment, what would those be?
Great question. One thing
And
is
I know you just said there's a lot more to it than
there is. No, and it's great. And there are all kinds of things that I could suggest. I mean, one of the universal things is the entrance, like we were just talking about with that Toronto situation, right? So is the entrance really welcoming? And that's going to be, for the employees. One of the things is, does the door open all the way? If there's stuff behind the door, if there's stuff jamming the door, if the door creaks, we don't want that kind of horror movie vibe. There's all kinds of things like this. So the door visibility, functionality, this is real estate agents talk about curb appeal. It's a big part of it. So that's still, even in your home office, even if nobody's coming to your door when you're working at home, you want to welcome yourself. And it's still speaking to the overall mindset of what's at my door, what's coming in, what am I welcoming? Cables is one thing that I spoke to, right? And people working at home, this is a big thing, right? Because there's people were, when
that's
COVID
why
hit,
my shots like this, Mark.
Yeah, I totally get you, right? And there's a reality, right? It's hard, we live in this cabled world. We have limited, capacity for space, and so we do the best we can. But cables are a bit of a nightmare sometimes. I can't wait till we have a wireless world. But in the meantime, if you can minimize the visibility of cables, if you can do things to group them, to bunch them, to hide them, that would be, I think, key. And the other thing is, on that biophilia principle, bring in some nature. I think this is one of the things that happens, right? You should work and you should be productive, and flowers go against that. Why would you have flowers? Why would you have plants? And you can see sometimes at malls when they buy plants, somebody in corporate said, okay, get this big thing, and they have this big horrible green plant that they occasionally dust, and it just takes up space, but there's no real beauty or aesthetics to it. Get yourself some flowers, buy some flowers, and have something on your desk that actually is colorful. You don't have to go iridescent unicorn rainbow like my shirt, but something that's just got some life to it and some individuality. Nature, flowers work in so many ways. There's the asymmetry, so it keeps you out of that linear box-like thinking, or it invites something that's a little bit different from that linear process. And there's beauty, and there's color. And, this is one of the things from Ingrid Fettel-Lee's book, Joyful. She's an environmental psychologist who studied the science of joy in design. It's mind-blowing. I've taken some courses with her because it's incredible. And, colorful environments remind our hunter-gatherer brains, they haven't changed a whole lot evolutionarily since those days, that there's an abundance of nutrition. There's a lot of vegetation, and there's water to nourish that vegetation. So and monochromatic environments make us think we're in the desert and there's a scarcity of resources. Well, how many companies tend to go for those monochromatic designs, right? And they think it's clean and it's fresh, and no, it's not.
When you're operating,
unintended consequence. You're basically putting people in competition because you're in the desert. Where's the water? Where's the vegetation? Where's the food? How are you putting food on the table? And they get people more in competition with one another because they haven't brought any color or joy or emotion into the environment. So
Rebecca says flowers work best when sent to me by a mysterious stranger.
This is true, but you can be a mysterious stranger to yourself and start it out.
Best for me when sent by my co-founder, but
wow, this is good. And very quickly,
Yeah.
abundance. Look, when we operate out of abundance versus operating out of scarcity, it
Mhm.
really does change things. And I
Absolutely.
love this alignment that you're bringing in terms of the world around you in the office or your home office, and
Mhm.
this idea of abundance versus scarcity. I think that is
Yeah,
really, really powerful.
yeah, it's pretty wild. And this
Yeah.
is the thing that somebody, again, there can be the unintended consequences. Like you just want to create a fresh space, clean space, all of that. I absolutely get it, and there is an aesthetic beauty to that. But something can be beautiful, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's balanced. And there's still those unintended consequences, and that's the thing we want to take care of.
Mark, what do you think is the biggest myth that people have about feng shui?
I think that you can't do what you want, and that you have to use culturally thematic decor. I think it's just because it came from China doesn't mean you have to put Chinese
Uh,
charms and trinkets around. And I think people do apply it that way. There's a very classical and traditional way. I've termed my approach contemporary feng shui because when I first started going to Japan to teach, I said, well, people say Western feng shui, but I don't think we need, again, this East-West
right,
divide. That's like live work. It's the same
right.
like division. And it's really about 21st century. What's going to work? You can absolutely use Chinese stuff, and it's some of those symbols, of course, they can work and they can do things, but there's ways to view the principles of feng shui and to apply it in that personal way so that, again, you're telling your story. You don't need bamboo, you don't need wind chimes, you don't need trinkets. If you want them, great, but I don't use them.
Right. And I think you can start with just having things surrounding you that make you happy
That
and make
starts.
you feel good and make you feel productive. And it's pretty easy to know what those things are, right? So
That's it. If we stop to think and question it, because we're so go go go. One of the things I have my students do, and we actually practiced this in class this week, was you go stand somewhere and you just stand there for 60 seconds. When do we do that? You just go stand in a corner of your room and you look at things, and you don't touch anything, or you'll be tempted to touch it and to move it or to do something. And it's great that you're noticing, but what's it like when you just stand there? You start to see what's working and what's not.
So
And
once again, we're thinking about psychology being internal and how feng shui gets you to think in terms of psychology and external. Same thing with what you were just talking about. I just lost my train of thought. This is great when this happens.
yeah, exactly, we're in the flow. Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, what's the
Oh,
internal
Stevie. Okay.
reaction?
So when you're just standing there, awareness, we think about self-awareness, an internal thing, which is a great thing to think about, but
Yeah,
we don't generally think about awareness just around us.
yeah,
So that's very helpful.
yeah,
external awareness.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And really, what I'd say, it can get very metaphysical here, but this illusion that inside and outside are separate.
Correct.
I mean, sure, physically, we have the physical world out there, and we think our thoughts and feelings and emotions, we imagine them inside because we can't see them in physical form. But like, what if it was all just one field, because we
Yeah.
know what we look at physically impacts us emotionally. Like, there's still this continuity and this continuum there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so it's not that they're connected, they're not disconnected because they're one thing. And
Correct.
so we can talk about connection, it's a quality, but connection suggests disconnection, that there is
Correct.
connection. Yeah.
Excellent. Let's move. We've got about 2 minutes left. Let's move to our two closeout questions that we
Mhm.
ask every guest. Mark, what's something you've learned in the last 6 months that might be useful to our viewers?
Every little bit matters. And that includes, like, you do something for 30 seconds or 1 minute, that's a whole lot more than nothing. So if you tidy up for 1 minute, you do 1 minute of push-ups or 1 minute of that's a whole lot more than nothing. And there's this incremental beneficial change that can take place.
It's the compounding effect, something we think a lot
Yeah.
about in our
Cumulative.
business.
Yeah. And our second question for you, Mark, is there a business challenge that you're facing
Hmm.
where one of our listeners and viewers today might be able to help you with?
Yeah, social media algorithms, Instagram, I'm not very Insta, I kind of max out the word content. I do my hashtags, I do all of that, but post reach can be really limiting. It can be really frustrating. And I know just, again, that incremental thing, you just need to keep doing it and so on. But anybody who's got some hints around bypassing that kind of limitation when you have 1,000 subscribers and you're certainly not getting even 10% of the hits, that's kind of one of the things, unfortunately, the times we're living in. But I'm all ears if people have suggestions around that.
Well, the one thing everyone can do today is to take that 30 seconds and just stand wherever you are and notice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. And all of those of you who are with us today, you can reach Mark on LinkedIn at Mark Ainley. You can also sign up for his newsletter and free ebook. And if you stay for the outro, we'll have a QR code for you to scan so that you can get that. And remember, if you're a solopreneur or if you create content for your business, you can get your free ebook from us, Business Storytelling from A to Z. We'll have a QR code for that as well. And if you're thinking about creating a course for your business, you don't want to miss our next show on November 18th with guest Rebecca Cuevas, founder of Learn and Get Smarter. And I know Rebecca's on with today. Welcome, Rebecca. And until then, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Mark.
Mark,
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
A real pleasure.
Thank you.